right, once again, the Biden administration just incapable of truth-telling, and some flat-out lying about the success of the Trump tax cuts is not the first time. Joining us now to critique it, Art Laffer, former Reagan economist, Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, and author of the brand-new book, Taxes Have Consequences. All right, Art, let's begin quickly. Here's what Jared Bernstein had to say last week on the subject of the Trump tax cuts.
The Trump tax cuts added almost $2 trillion to the deficit. Trump Republicans then went on to add another $2+ trillion on the spending side, all while Republicans, including Kevin McCarthy, voted for 3 increases in the debt ceiling. All right.
So, all right, I'll leave the Kevin McCarthy part alone. That's not the topic. But Jared Bernstein is saying the Trump tax cuts caused a $1.5 trillion or $2 trillion loss of revenues. I thought the Trump tax cuts proved that the Laffer curve worked, that lower marginal tax rates actually increase revenues. What do you say on this?
Well, we have the actual numbers, Larry, and what shocks me here is Jared is, of course, probably the personal economist of the president, probably the man closest to him, and when he is saying these things that are totally wrong, he said that the tax cuts increased the deficit by $2 trillion. In fact, the truth is, in the 2 years following President Trump's Tax Cuts and Job Act, tax revenues, total tax revenues, federal, state, and local, increased by $400 billion, way more than they had in the previous 2 years. And federal tax revenues increased by $240 billion. Not only did they not increase the deficit, they reduced the deficit quite substantially. And if you extended that over a 10-year period, which is how you're supposed to measure this, they would have reduced the deficit by maybe $1 trillion, completely the opposite of what Jared says. Jared is just factually totally wrong, and he should know better. He's a PhD economist, and he is in a job that is really responsible. I am shocked by what he said.
I want to put if the control room producers could put that table up, tax rates and tax revenues, one more time. I just want to point that out. It's a very interesting, because it proves Art's point, not only for the Trump years, but if you look at that, the peak in marginal tax rates was in the Kennedy years, about 90%. And the marginal tax rate, this is the top rate, Art, falls to a low point of 28% under Reagan. Now, you can see revenues, the yellow line, start climbing during the Kennedy years, continue to climb through the Reagan years, and you have some cyclicality in there, I think. But the revenue line is still nicely stabilized, even while the tax rate line stays low. So this is a long-term affirmation, I think, Art, you would say, of the Laffer curve.
Yeah, it's these are facts, Larry. These are not things. They're not how you feel. They're not opinions. These are the facts. If you look at whenever we raise tax rates on the rich, tax revenues on the rich would go down. Whenever we lowered tax rates on the rich, tax revenues would go up. They not only earned more, but they sheltered their income less, and we collected more revenues. The same thing is true with economic growth. When you raise tax rates on the rich, like we did in the Great Depression and like we did in World War II, growth of the economy went way down in consumption items. That went way down. Also, the poor did much worse when you raise tax rates on the rich. Now, when we cut tax rates on the rich, as you so beautifully document in your book on the Kennedy years and the Reagan years, when we lowered tax rates on the rich, the economy boomed. And guess who got the most benefits? The lowest echelons on the income ladder, because they found jobs, increases output. And that is exactly what happened under Trump's bill. Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was an enormous benefit to the U.S. economy, and it worked exactly as it has historically.
I think, Art, one of the more interesting parts about the Trump tax cuts, and the Biden crew will never acknowledge this, but they keep telling us how the Trump tax cuts benefited the rich. The reality was, the heart of the Trump tax cut was making our corporate tax rate competitive. Not off the charts, but it went from 35 to 21, put us about the middle of the OECD big economies. That's all it did, put us about the middle. But walk me through this. I mean, I thought it was the median income for a typical family that boomed. And I thought the poverty rate went down and things of that sort. It wasn't the rich. The rich actually took it on the chin because the state and local SALT deduction was capped at 10,000, and they were very unhappy about that. But I thought it was the middle class and the lower incomes that got the biggest from the corporate tax cut.
Yeah, the lowest income groups, Larry, really benefited. Now, truthfully, the unemployment rate in the use for minorities, black, let's say, Hispanic, or people without a high school diploma, those unemployment rates had been dropping, but they continued to drop at very rapid rates under Trump after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and hit all-time lows. The poverty rate in the United States, which had also been dropping under Obama, it had been, but when Trump came in, it dropped faster. It dropped to the lowest rate ever recorded. So these are the types of things that happen. And the median income went way up at the end of the Trump era. Now, it had gone up under Obama up to that time. It's not that Obama was doing badly at the end. He wasn't. But Trump extended that succession of successes. And it made it a much better economy for the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised. Now, the rich didn't do badly. But we don't hate rich people. What we want to do is make poor people rich, not rich people poor. And what happened with the Trump tax cuts is they led to the economy being far better than it had been under the previous 8 or 16 years. I mean, we've been in a long slide down for 25 years now, Larry. And Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act gave us a 2-year reprieve on that and brought back some of the prosperity just beautifully back and raised tax revenues. Mm-hmm. It helped reduce the deficit, not increase it. And you just ask yourself the question, Larry, why haven't the Democrats reversed Trump's tax cuts if they were so bad? Why didn't they do that? Because they know very well that the Trump tax cuts worked really well, and they just don't want to give Trump credit for that wonderful, wonderful bill that gave prosperity back to the U.S. And you were there the whole time, by the way.
Well, I would just say it's interesting. Two things. Joe Biden voted in favor of the Reagan tax reform in 1986.
Yes,
so did almost every Democrat. Reagan took the top rate to 28. I mean, today it's 37. The Bidens would like it to go probably 40, 45 if they had their way. But Biden voted for that. He'll never acknowledge it, but he did, 28% and 15%. And secondly, I think the only economic benefits we're getting in this high inflation period and big spending and regulating and so forth is from the Trump tax cuts. I mean, I think if it weren't for the Trump tax cuts, the economy would have sunk out of sight a long time ago. Now it's just flirting with sinking out of sight.
Yeah. And Jared Bernstein made mock of a former Senator Toomey for saying that the tax revenues now are 20% of GDP and all that, and misleading and bad. It's not true. He's right. Toomey's correct. I just wish these Democrats, Larry, and you can put it on here in recording, I would be willing to debate with any of these Democrats in a big, fair audience about the Trump tax cuts and the benefits from those tax cuts. Or if you want even further back, these are covered in my book with Gene Sinkfield and Brian Dimitrovic. To cover that, we cover these areas. They are just plain wrong, and they should know better.
Good work, Art.
Thanks.
Good work, Art. We appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you, Larry.